study,
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
The best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. You know, I held off as long as I could, waiting for some sort of news to hit, some sort of reason to record a podcast to come across the feed this week. But there is not a whole lot going on in the world of Nintendo. So I even looked at anniversaries, which is kind of my go-to when it comes to things that, you know, when there's a slow news week, slow reviews week, anything like that. But Nintendo is really, really quiet right now, and not a whole lot of big anniversaries this week or this time period or anything like that. So rather than trying to stretch something and have it fit into a place where it's not supposed to, a square peg into a round hole, if you will, I decided to just do a listener Q&A. So, you know, I reached out to a guest to try to have them on, and unfortunately, it didn't work out timing wise. So we're going to do this listener Q&A, and it's just going to be me, you know, talking to you and answering your questions. You're basically my guest, if you will, for this episode. And I have a bunch of questions that were submitted both via the Patreon and community Discord, which, as I mentioned, every single episode gets priority access to these Q&A style episodes. But I also got some from email, from Blue Sky. So we're going to go ahead and answer a whole bunch of questions. We'll go for about an hour or so. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. And that's going to be the way that this goes. Unfortunately, all the big releases and all the big news this week are not really related to Nintendo, but I do have a show called All Things Gamers that I do on a semi-regular basis over on the Patreon page. This week, I put out an episode talking kind of about the rise and fall of Xbox, like the highs and lows of the history of Xbox, with a little bit of my own personal history with the platform interjected throughout the way. So if you want to check that out, that is available exclusively to the $10 patrons of the show. But yeah, let's talk about what else the Patreon gets you, as I always do. $3 tier gets you access to the community Discord. $5 tier gets you early and ad-free episodes delivered straight to your feed. And then the $10 Patreon gets you shout outs at the end of every episode, plus the semi-regular All Things Gamers podcast. And again, without the Patreon, this show would not exist. Before we jump into this listener Q&A, I did want to surface one thing. I have been, I've been at like this constant sprint with games lately where, I adore my job. I am so grateful to have it every single day that I get to go to work and do this. I mean, that was even further accentuated after Game Informer was shut down back in August of 2024. And then we came back, we got a new lease on life, thanks to our new parent company. So I do have that perspective of how grateful I am to have this job, even more so than I did before. I've been doing games media work for about 18 years now, if you count before the 11 and a half years that I've been at Game Informer. And before that I was writing for like OXM and IGN and Kotaku and Joystick, if you remember that site. So and I also ran my own website back then for about 4 years and contributed to other stuff prior to that. But having a full-time gig in this, I'm extremely, extremely grateful. But that said, there is one thing that it does kind of hinder, and that is my ability to play games for fun, which, woe is me, right? But that said, I've been trying to get through a replay. I'm doing a kind of a long form replay of the Breath of the Wild series, the Wild Era of the Zelda franchise. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to do Breath of the Wild, then Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, then I'm going to do Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Neither of those I've played, by the way, so I'm excited to make some progress in those. I started both of them, but I fell off pretty quickly. So I'm mostly interested in the story of those. So what I'm going to end up doing is actually playing through those on probably the easiest setting. I think there's difficulties in those. I just want to get the story of those, basically. And I'm not the biggest Warriors or Musou fan. That's why I had my coworker Eric Van Allen on a few months ago to talk about the ins and outs and intricacies of that genre. But I'm excited to check those out. I'm excited to play through those. And then I'm going to wrap it all up with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which will be my first time replaying it. But the reason I bring this up is just before, so I decided, I have been going for several weeks on end here. And at the tail end of last week, I started feeling a little bit burnt out. I started feeling like I was kind of running on empty with all the stuff that I've been doing. I've been putting in a lot of extra hours and everything to kind of get through some reviews. I wrote a big thing in this next issue that was very time sensitive, and I had to hit a deadline. So I decided to take an extra week, an extra couple of days tacked on to this weekend to just, relax and play games that I want to play. So I finally finished my replay of Breath of the Wild, which I started in the middle of last year. That's how kind of precious my my free time gaming has been. And obviously I've played other games for fun. Outside of that, I usually get diverted away to newer games because I do want to have an informed opinion on those for my job. But yeah, I've set out on this mission starting in the middle of 2025 to do this Wild Era replay. The only game that I've played more than once in this collection has been Breath of the Wild. So this was my third playthrough of Breath of the Wild. And the last time I tried to do kind of like as much of a completionist playthrough as possible. This time I just kind of did like the golden path where I did some exploration, did a lot of optional shrines, did the labyrinth and everything. But like, I just kind of wanted to get the story of it. So I finally got around to finishing this playthrough. And this was inspired by the fact that we got a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And it is such a massive upgrade. There's still, I was actually shocked this time around by how much pop-in there's been as I'm going through, like, just foliage kind of populating once you get close to it. But man, like, I have to say, I've said multiple times on this podcast that Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time. And I think Tears of the Kingdom is maybe a better game overall, at least, in terms of like fun features and clever design and everything. Yeah, there's problems with the depths and the Sky Islands and everything. But Breath of the Wild, after finishing that, there are some things that I don't love about the game. But overall, that is just an incredibly designed game. It's still, we're 8 years, 9 years after the fact. And, Breath of the Wild still holds up. It still is just this incredible experience. It redefined open world gaming in ways that I wasn't prepared for. And I really think that, replaying your favorite games has such a really cool way to instill a new sense of perspective. And that's certainly what I get every single time I replay Breath of the Wild. And I'm really excited to replay Tears of the Kingdom at the end of this long haul, like replay, because I remember how much that broke my my Breath of the Wild brain when it was like, all right, how do I get up there? And it's like, oh, I can just use Ascend. Or, oh man, my weapons keep breaking. Oh, I'll just fuse it to something else. Or I don't have any good weapons. Let me just make one, basically. And then, of course, Ultra Hand takes everything to the next level. So I'm just wanted to share an update there, that I am having a blast playing through this Wild Era of Zelda. And now I'm on to the new stuff, at least new to me stuff, because like I said, I haven't played the Hyrule Warriors games outside of that first one. I played through all the way to the end. So yeah, now that I have Breath of the Wild fresh on my brain, I'm excited to dive into more of that lore, but through kind of the lens of a different genre and familiarity with these characters that I just spent, like, a little bit of time. You don't spend that much time with the champions in in Breath of the Wild, but I'm excited to spend more time with them through Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. So that is kind of the update that I have there. It's just, I cannot recommend playing your favorite games over and over again. I know there's always this pressure. I wrote this article back when Game Informer first came back called "Joy is Reason Enough." And really the whole argument is, especially in the age of social media, and then, folks in my profession in particular, we feel this pressure to kind of keep up with the latest and greatest. And I think that's fun. Like, it's fun to have conversations about the newest game out there on social media and with people that you usually talk about that stuff with, either whether it's in real life, whether that's on the internet or whatever. But, I cannot emphasize enough how refreshing it is to just go back to a game you love. I'm already itching to also replay Final Fantasy X. We're talking about this Ocarina of Time remake. That is the excuse that I need to replay that game. So yeah, I mean, go play that favorite game if you've been like feeling kind of like run down. It's almost rejuvenating to jump back into a game that you love and you have familiarity with. It's called comfort food gaming for a reason, because it's kind of like this warm blanket, either of nostalgia if it's a super old game, or if it's just a game that you haven't played in a while. Like, it feels refreshing almost, rather than kind of like stressful in the way that some other games can be. And even if the game you love is stressful, like say it's a survival horror game, then there's a certain comfort that comes with that. So yeah, my recommendation, if you're feeling kind of out of gaming, I've gotten some questions about that actually, through like the Game Informer replies section that I do every single issue, of like, I'm feeling worn down. Like, I just don't feel like I'm that into gaming anymore. I don't think that, it's maybe the games that are coming out that make you kind of feel that way. But two, like, replaying a favorite game really can revitalize a love of the medium. It's a special feeling, and it'll tell you a lot about your passion for gaming. Because I certainly feel on fire about gaming after coming out of that. It's been a long, difficult stretch for this industry, and it's easy to get down on it. I know I certainly have on this podcast multiple times, but something special hits in your brain when you get to replay a favorite game of all time. So sorry to take up the first chunk of this episode with just something completely unrelated to what we're going to be doing in this episode. And that is, we are going to be answering your questions. So I've already, you've allowed me to indulge myself on this solo episode enough. So let's get into some of your questions. I put out a call this morning, as I'm recording this, as you're listening to this, if you're not in the Patreon, you are listening to this the day after I put out that call. But I just put out a call saying, like, what do you want me to talk about? What do you want? Do you have any questions for me? What are we going to dive into and dig into in this episode of All Things Nintendo? So I'm going to start on the Patreon and the Discord, because those are the places where people get priority. And then if there's any time left, I will jump on over to things I got on Blue Sky, things I got through email, and so on and so forth. So thanks for letting me, just kind of yap your ear off about just, me replaying a 9-year-old game. So let's go over to the Patreon. We have, it's Hugo's Nook, freelance artist on Patreon. Hugo says, when you are interviewing developers, how often does a question get banned or barred by PR? Can you recall some questions that you've asked that you really wish you heard the answer to, but PR intervened? I'm asking because I'd love someone to ask Miyamoto about why they decided to change Rosalina's story in the Galaxy movie, given it was such an iconic part of the Galaxy games. But I've got a feeling PR would say such a question is off limits, especially considering his contentious history with Galaxy's storybook. Now, I don't necessarily know that that question would be off limits. I think that, asking why something has changed is pretty commonplace, honestly. In fact, the next time I interview Shigeru Miyamoto with, hopefully there is a next time, I would love to know that answer. I think that is an answer that, I think that is something that a lot of people are curious about. I know that people have asked if, the kind of the familial ties that are established in the Galaxy movie are going to be canonical. And I believe that Miyamoto did say that that will be reflected in the games going forward. I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I mean, it is certainly a thing that happens where you go into an interview and you ask questions and PR, I think early on in my career, I got it a lot more. Now I think that like I have enough rapport with a lot of the PR folks that I have a little bit longer of a leash, because there is this kind of I they know that I will loop it back into something relevant. Now that said, I've asked questions when I this early on, when I think this was like 2016, I had like a 2-hour long interview with the head of Sonic team, Takashi Iizuka. And, we were touching on everything. He gave me all kinds of information about the history of Sonic. I was writing a long, long story. You can read it on Game Informer right now. It's called Where Sonic Went Wrong. And I remember, he told me a story about how he thought he almost died during Sonic Heroes development. He told me like he was very candid about his thoughts on the Sonic Boom character designs. He was very candid about his thoughts. Eventually, I mean, this is a later interview, but he's Takashi Iizuka. I've had so many great interviews with him, and it's very rare that PR will get involved, especially with him. There was one time where I ended that interview. It was like the really long 2-hour long interview, and it was like kind of emotionally draining because we were talking about so many historical things. And I said, "All right, will we ever get Sonic Adventure 3?" And he just looks down and goes, "Someday." And PR interjects because they could see the headline running. Takashi Iizuka says it's going to happen someday, and PR goes, maybe someday. And so it wasn't really an interjection. I don't really know if I have any other like good examples of when PR has jumped in. There have been times where this happens frequently, where I walk into an interview and they say, "Hey, we are going to keep the questions specific to this game." Most notably for that was E3 2019. You may recall the Nintendo Direct at E3 2019 ended with the reveal of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel, which would go on to be called Tears of the Kingdom. And what was my first interview? Eiji Aonuma. And we were supposed to be talking about the Link's Awakening remake that was coming to Switch. So I walk into that interview and Nintendo PR knows that, I'm going to want to talk about the reveal trailer of the sequel of one of the biggest games of the last decade, right? So I walk in and they're like, "Hey, just so you know, we know what just aired on the Nintendo Direct. We are only talking about Link's Awakening. Please keep the questions specific to Link's Awakening." I did not. I would say it was like 50-50. Talking about Link's Awakening and talking about other topics. So it has to be, there is some give and take in that regard. PR is there to do their jobs, and often they do it very well. I've had very few negative interactions with PR people in this industry. And so I respect what they have to do. They have to keep, the messaging and the stories that the company wants told, and the reason that they are providing these spokespeople for the media availability. If Takashi Iizuka comes out to promote the next Sonic game, he doesn't want to talk about, something completely unrelated. He is doing this because he is on the clock and he wants to talk about this specific thing that he is promoting. I understand that. So when I walked into that Eiji Aonuma interview, I was like, yeah, okay, we'll keep it pretty focused. I was like, I do have some other questions, but it won't go too far off the rails. And I kind of gave them that reassurance. And knowing that, I think they gave me a little bit longer of a leash, not to mention, the long running relationship that I have. So, I got in some questions about like, that's the interview where I got the question in about the Skyward Sword remake or remaster without the motion controls. And he gave me the line that it would be close to impossible. And then a few years later, we got that game. That was an interview where I was trying, because I was trying. In E3 2019, I had an interview with Eiji Aonuma, and then who was the person who was basically the head of development for Ocarina of Time. And then I had an interview with Takashi Tezuka that same day. And, he was the director of Link's Awakening. So I was like, oh, well, I can ask some questions about Link's Awakening to Takashi Tezuka and then see how much Eiji Aonuma would talk about the influence that A Link to the Past had on the development of Ocarina of Time. Because, there's some narrative structure similarities in there. If you've played through both those games, you know what I'm talking about. And Eiji Aonuma was very much along the lines of like, I want to tell you how important Link's Awakening was to my history. I don't really want to talk about A Link to the Past. And to the point that I asked 2 questions about A Link to the Past and like the influence that it had on him. And he stopped me. It was him, not PR, that said, why are you asking me about A Link to the Past? I didn't develop that game. And I was like, no. And I had to explain why I was asking those questions. And I was just like, yeah, I was thinking of like writing a thing. And and he was like, oh, okay, I understand. And he was just confused more than anything. Yeah, it's been rare for me anyway that PR has jumped in. And I think that it does stem from those pre-existing relationships and, kind of a track record of, they've worked with me in the past and there is a little bit of trust that is involved there. But yeah, there's been a few times where I've been kind of like, oh, we're not ready to talk about that quite yet. Like, when I go on cover story trips, I'll ask a question, and I've definitely had moments where like, I'm laser focused on the developer that I'm talking to, but PR is always sitting off to the side, and I'll see them like usually like down on their laptop or checking their phone. And I've definitely seen times where I've asked a question and I've seen like the PR person look up from whatever they're doing on whatever screen they're looking at. And that's when I know that I'm kind of like walking up to that edge. So you kind of have to take those like nonverbal cues as well of like, all right, I think I'm pushing it maybe a little bit too far here. They're going to jump in. And then that ends up, actually, in my experience, I try to push it to that point, but not get to the point where they interject. Because what I found is if they interject and say, hey, we're not talking about that quite yet, that makes the subject a little bit more guarded for future questions. Because you don't want PR to remind them that this is anything other than a conversation. Once it's kind of like formalized in the sense that like, hey, we have a chaperone that's making sure you stay on brand, they tend to tighten up a little bit. And that's not one person or another person. That is just in general a rule of thumb that I try to do. Now, obviously, I do push the envelope a little bit. Like I said, with that Eiji Aonuma interview in 2019, I did ask him about, reasons for wanting to do a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And apparently I was the only person that he opened up to about that, like that at that E3. I was like, oh, why did you want to reuse this Hyrule? Like, what was the reason behind, doing another sequel? And I think I did ask him, like, because, famously, Eiji Aonuma directed Ocarina of Time and then developed or directed Majora's Mask in a year. And he gave himself a year to make a sequel to that game. And I did ask him because he's famously come out and said like that was a big mistake. Like I was such a hustle and such a sprint to get Majora's Mask done in that time frame. I ended the interview on kind of like a lighthearted, like, well, are you giving yourself more time to create this game than you did Majora's Mask? And he laughed and said, absolutely, I learned my lesson, basically. So yeah, I mean, I guess like that's the best answer I have for you. Again, it's small things here and there, and then an occasional example that I have in my head, but like not really any things that really stick out aside from like maybe early on in my career when, I hadn't really gotten the art of like walking up to the line without crossing it, or or having that rapport with PR people or developers where they feel a little bit more comfortable opening up maybe beyond what they would with people who they aren't familiar with. So I mean, that is probably the best answer I have for you. I'm sorry I don't have any like salacious, like, oh, I asked this question and they interjected and like Phoenix Wright. And no, I think that's the best I got for you. But thank you so much for the question. It's Hugo.
You tell yourself, no one wants your college-era band tees. But on Depop, people are searching for exactly what you've got. You once paid a small fortune for them at merch stands. Now, a teenager who calls them vintage will offer that same small fortune back. Sell them easily on Depop. Just snap a few photos and we'll take care of the rest. Who knew your questionable music taste would be a money-making machine? Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Nook. Moving on to Nettie over on Discord. They say, random thought I had today. I wonder if Star Fox will have mouse controls for aiming on Switch 2. Could be an interesting way to make the concept of Zero more approachable. Though I'd probably personally rather have it for Kid Icarus Uprising port or sequel, or Sin and Punishment, based on what I've heard about that series. Yeah, I mean, I think that almost any game that has aiming controls will have mouse functionality on Switch 2, especially first party stuff, right? We saw it with Metroid Prime. That was a huge selling point for that. I think that Nintendo, they've learned a very hard lesson from the Wii and Wii U era, and that is like including fun functionality that is like one of the gimmicks of their platform, but without making it so intrusive that it impedes the gameplay itself. And I think that we have a lot of examples with Wii and Wii U and 3DS to some extent, but maybe not as much of an extent, where Nintendo relied too heavily on the gimmick, right? Like, I mean, I have a hard time playing Skyward Sword. That's why I asked AJ Aonuma about the motion control-less remaster, because I just don't like waving the sword around. It's a fun novelty, but for a long game like Zelda, I don't really want to spend all that time playing that. The same could be said about Wii U. You know, we have a lot of games. I think Star Fox Zero, Nettie brings that up. That is a perfect example of a game that I think is brought down by its over reliance on the gimmick of like the second screen and the touch screen and all that stuff. So now there are examples of them doing a great job with that. I think that the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess remakes or remasters on the Wii U are the best way to play those games, because, and I think the same goes for almost any Zelda game that has a second screen, because you don't have to go into the pause menu in order to swap out items, or you can see the map, anything like that. And the same thing for Splatoon. That first Splatoon game has the map on your second screen, and I think that is fantastic because you can just tap it and you automatically warp to that part of the map. You know, I think that the Switch era, they've learned their lesson about, yeah, we want to use the gimmicks that we have, whether that be HD Rumble, whether that be the gyroscope, whether that be the mouse controls now on the Switch 2, but we don't want to make it so you have to use that. Now, they did it for like Drag and Drive, but the whole point of Drag and Drive was to have the two mouse controls, because that was that's the entire impetus of the gameplay functionality. Now, for a game like Metroid Prime, I played that game without ever using the mouse controls, outside of just the fun novelty of like, oh, let me check it out. And I did that at the preview event as well, and it works great. Same thing for like Dead Zone Rogue, which is a game that I am extremely high on. It just came to Switch 2, and when they brought it to Switch 2, they added the mouse functionality, and it works great. But I am still just so much a gamepad player, or a controller player. And so I appreciate that they're not forcing me to use the mouse controls. Now, Star Fox has kind of this sordid history with gimmicks and using gimmicks in an intrusive way. We saw that with the DS game. We saw that with the Wii U game. We didn't get a Wii game, but like, there was a Wii game in development. And I think that, and I mean, the Star Fox franchise in general was kind of founded on gimmicks. If you listen to the Star Fox history podcast that I did about a month ago, what was the way that Star Fox was introduced into the SNES, that it was even made possible, was through the Super FX chip. So there's one gimmick. The next gimmick, all right, the Rumble Pack. That's Star Fox 64, So it does kind of have this long-running history, and then you get to DS and Wii U, and they are more than half of the Star Fox games are the result or are heavily weighed down or use heavily these gimmicks that Nintendo is wanting to promote through these games. So, I would not be surprised if the Star Fox, whatever ends up coming out on Switch 2, does use those mouse controls. And I think it would be perfect, right? Or I wonder if there's even a world where you can hold the Joy-Con on like upright and use it almost like a flight stick. I mean, that would also be a cool way to do it. Like have that be an optional control. I think that if there's a way that they could do that, that would be a very fun use of like unconventional control styles. But yeah, I agree also that Kid Icarus would be perfect for the mouse controls. And I've never played Sin and Punishment, even though it's been, I think, on Virtual Console since the Wii. But yeah, I've heard that would be a great candidate for that as well. Firamar on Discord has two kind of related questions here. So we'll start with the one. Hey, Brian, hope all is going well. So, with the price of video games going up despite most being on the market for years, do you think it will be better for people to go back to one game system per generation mentality like we had in the 90s? For example, choosing Nintendo Switch 2 means no PlayStation or Xbox for that generation. Plus, with the exception of Nintendo, console exclusivity isn't what it used to be. And then Firamar follows up. That was on Discord. Firamar follows up on my Patreon post asking for questions saying, do you think that the mentality of only gaming on one system is respectable or antiquated? When I go to my local game convention every year and talk to anyone under 25, their jaws drop when I tell them with a straight face that I only game on Nintendo systems. So, the price of video games, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to keep this short because, there's a lot of different ways we could go with the answer of this question. But yeah, gaming is becoming more and more of a luxury hobby as a result of it's both, trade policies that have been implemented as well as kind of like the hardware shortage as a result of kind of the AI boom, where all these companies are skyrocketing their price of hardware components because AI is driving up the costs of those because they require a lot of power in order to run these AI devices and AI systems. So that's why we're seeing chip shortages. That's why we're seeing graphics cards skyrocketing. That's why memory is becoming so expensive. So that is why we're also seeing the PlayStation 5 Pro jump up to $900, which is crazy. I thought it was a joke when they priced that at $700, but pricing it at $900, I mean, I think that, we hopefully these policies and this AI boom that is driving up the cost of these components doesn't last until we get the next hardware iterations here, whether that be Project Helix that Xbox has announced or the PlayStation 6 that that PlayStation is reportedly planning to launch in the tail end of 2027. I sincerely hope these things are smoothed over by then, or else we might be looking at the most expensive consoles that we've ever seen. I mean, it's going to be absurd if those things are not taken care of by the end of 2027 or whenever Project Helix comes out. Thankfully, Nintendo Switch 2 is out. If you're a Nintendo only gamer, that is taken care of. If you already have your Switch 2, you're set. Now, they could always release a Switch 2 Pro. They could always release a Switch 2 OLED. They could always some sort of console revision. And if that happens, I would imagine it will be priced a little bit higher than they would have otherwise without these extenuating circumstances. But no, I don't think that, I don't think having just one console is necessarily a bad thing. I think that it allows you to focus. I mean, there is certainly a thing to be said about decision paralysis. I know that there are times where I'm like, yes, finally, a free night to game. And then I'm like, all right, I have Soros. I have Resident Evil Requiem. I have my replay of Breath of the Wild. I have, Forza Horizon 5 I've been wanting to replay. Stuff like that. There's so many options. It does certainly help with that and keep you focused on what you really care about, right? Like, even though I talked about this in a previous answer where, choosing the game that you really want to play. Now, of course, there's always going to be FOMO if you only have a Nintendo Switch 2. you might look over the fence and be like, I'd really love to play Spider-Man 2 by Insomniac, but I don't have a PC and I don't have a PlayStation 5. So there will always be that FOMO, and it gets even more intensified if you are on social media and you have, people in the games space that you talk to on a regular basis. But that said, there are definitely positives there, and it certainly keeps your costs down. You're not going to be dropping, like, even if every console stays at $500, which I would highly doubt unless things change drastically right now. That's $1,500 to buy the entire hardware suite. That's a lot of money. So if things go up, though, like, it could be as high as like $2,500 if Project Helix comes out and is closer to $1,000. PlayStation 6 comes out and it's closer to $1,000. The Switch 2 is $500. Gaming is real expensive, and games are only going to get more expensive. We've seen Nintendo experiment with the $70 price tag. We've seen most multi-platform AAA developers, at least dip their toe in, if not fully cannonball into the pool of $70 games. There's a real possibility that when Grand Theft Auto 6 comes out, it is going to be more expensive than that. I mean, there's been reports, there's been speculation of higher price tags for that for a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have any inside information there, and I don't want to rumor monger or anything, but everything, look around you. Everything is more expensive right now. And gaming is, a luxury hobby at this point. If you are able to afford a video game console or a really nice gaming PC, that's great. And you're set up for some of the most incredible entertainment that exists on the planet. But, if you have to replace any of that stuff in the next couple of years, it's probably going to be more expensive, which is wild, because this is like the first time that I can ever remember prices going up on consoles as the cycle goes forward. Like, we are coming up on the end of the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 life cycle, and they're more expensive now than they were when they launched back in 2020. That is almost unheard of. Usually we get price cuts accompanied by some sort of pro model or anything. Now, we got the pro model on the PlayStation side. We did not get the price cut. And again, in fact, it is more expensive now than when it launched. So I could see a world where, I know a lot of families already do this, where, they're like, all right, we're going to get Switch 2, and that's just going to be the system that we have, or we're going to get PS5, and that is going to be the system that we have. And I think that does circle back to a topic that I talked about on this week's All Things Gamers. If you're a $10 patron, I was talking about the kind of difficult spot that Xbox is in right now. And, Xbox, for families that can only afford one console, I think Xbox has by far the weakest claim to being that console, and as prices continue to skyrocket, more and more families are going to have to make that decision. So if I'm a big fan of Halo, and I'm a big fan of Spider-Man and The Last of Us and Uncharted, and I'm a big fan of Zelda, I'm eliminating Xbox right away, because I can play games like Gears of War and Forza and Halo on my PS5 or my PC if I happen to have that. Whereas you can play some of the PS5 exclusives on PC, but not many. And, you can play, you can only play Zelda on Nintendo, obviously. So the decision you have to make is going to be between those two. It's not going to be between the three of them, because all of the Xbox exclusives, for the most part, are on PS5 as well now. So it is a tricky thing for Xbox, because I do think they were making decisions that were better for gaming in general and exposure of their IPs. But they've also kind of systematically eliminated themselves from the conversation of, I can afford one console, what do I choose? And for now, I think most people are going to be between PlayStation and Nintendo for that reason. So, I do think that there is something to be said about sticking with one console and just, exploring every corner of that. But for me, I'm in a special situation because I am a professional in the games media space. So I always try to get the best experience possible. That said, I did draw the line at the PlayStation 5 Pro. I just have the regular PS5, and I have the Xbox Series X, and I have the Switch 2. Those are my three consoles that I have. And then I have a really nice gaming PC that thankfully I commissioned to have built at the tail end, or I guess middle of last year. And so it was before kind of all these price hikes really kicked into effect. Now I bet the thing that I built would maybe be 25% more expensive, if not more. So, I think that gaming on one system, I think it's perfectly fine. If that works for you and you don't feel like the overwhelming sense of missing out on some of these exclusives, I know that I would not be okay with, missing out on Wolverine when that comes out later this year. I wouldn't be okay missing out with Grand Theft Auto 6 when that comes out, hopefully later this year. A lot of the sports games you kind of get like, bad versions of them on the Switch 2. So, and a lot of multi-platform games don't feel quite as good. We're seeing these reports of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It runs well, but if you go into any building, it seems like a lot of like the interior stuff has been removed. Like if there was stuff on a table, it's just a blank table now, assuming to help with performance. So we are still getting a little bit of that weirdness. It has been made better by the Switch 2's better performance. But yeah, I think that it's perfectly fine. If you don't feel like you're missing out on anything and you feel fulfilled, only sticking to Mario, Zelda, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Tomodachi Life, Pokopia, there's a lot to dig into in the Nintendo catalog. Nintendo, as good as PlayStation is about having exclusives, The Last of Us is unbelievable. They have, Spider-Man games are some of my favorite games of all time. Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei are unbelievable, but nobody rivals Nintendo's suite of exclusives. So if you are going to buy a Nintendo system and you're like, that's all I need, then good for you. Like, you get to save money. You might not be involved in every cultural zeitgeist conversation about whatever the latest big AAA third-party game is, but if that's not important to you, then go for it. I do think it's less common these days, but it might become more common with the way prices are going on some of these systems. But yeah, I think I answered kind of in a very roundabout way for Firamar's questions, but thanks so much for submitting that. Zek Three Sword Sama on Discord. What is the best Mexican food, and which Nintendo character embodies that food best? Oh man. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with tacos, but what type? I'm a big tacos al pastor fan. I still need to make my pilgrimage to Mexico City in order to get like legit tacos al pastor. I also love cochinita. I think that is unbelievable. If you're talking like, I went to Culiacan a few years ago and I got carne asada, and that was ridiculous. Some of the best tacos I've ever had in my life were on that trip. But, just so many amazing, amazing food that comes out of Mexico. Man, what Nintendo character embodies tacos? I mean, is it just Mariachi Waluigi? Like, is that the answer there? I was, if we're going like, Cochinita, we might go with maybe Wario. We'll go with Wario for Cochinita. What Nintendo IP? This is from Zek Three Sword Sama as well over on the Discord. What Nintendo IP could make a really good Souls-like? I mean, Zelda is the obvious answer. Elden Ring clearly was inspired by Zelda, and I think Zelda would be a cool Souls-like. It might be a little derivative at this point since it's but it would be kind of like, a Tomb Raider, for example. That inspired the Uncharted franchise, and then what happened in 2013 when they rebooted Tomb Raider? They took so many cues from Uncharted, so it's kind of like this cyclical inspiration. I could see a world where Zelda kind of does that cyclical inspiration. There were definitely some, I mean, it's not Souls-like in the sense that like death is a part of the gameplay, or, it's extremely like, difficult or anything, but there were definitely some hints that maybe Nintendo was a fan of Souls-likes in the development of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Oh, great. My neighbor's leaf blowing. So hopefully they choose the worst possible times. They always do. So hopefully it doesn't bother you too much. Hopefully it doesn't come through here. Yeah, I think Zelda is the obvious answer, but let's go Fire Emblem. I think that, we put Fire Emblem Warriors out as like okay, it fits well in the Musu genre. It would be cool to have a Fire Emblem Souls-like. That's going to be my final answer there. All right, we have some good ones from Nintendo 101 over on the Discord. Your top 5 Switch and Switch 2 multiplayer games. All right. Top 5 Switch and Switch 2 multiplayer games. All right, so Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, right off the top. It doesn't get any better than that. That might be one of the greatest multiplayer games of all time. Mario Kart World. I know that game gets hated on so much, but Knockout Tour mode is about as fun as I've had playing a multiplayer game in years. I can always jump on Knockout Tour. We've done it for the community night for Patreon people. Every once in a while, we'll throw up a community night, and we started the first time it was just Mario Kart World. Had an amazing time. Then we did Kirby Air Riders for the second one, and then we kind of got halfway through that, and they said, we should just maybe jump over to Mario Kart World. So we did that, and yeah, Knockout Tour just is unrivaled in terms of that. Let's do Splatoon 3. I think there is an incredible suite of multiplayer modes, even though, I think the single player is underrated, but like Turf War, Salmon Run, all that stuff is so much fun. Let's do Super Mario Party Jamboree. I think that they knocked it out of the park with the latest Mario Party, and Mario Party is always a crowd pleaser. Like you could have people over who are diehard gamers, and you can have people over who have, maybe not picked up a controller since N64, and Mario Party is fun enough that you can jump in and jump out of that. What else? I'll give an honorable mention to Overcooked. I think that Overcooked is one of those games. Same thing for Jackbox. Those titles are fun for any group. Playing through. When I go to my parents' house, if there's like 4 or more people, they're probably going to break out the PS4 that I got them a long time ago, and they are going to fire up Overcooked or fire up a Jackbox game, because those are just so much fun for anybody. I'll give an honorable mention to Snipper Clips. I think Snipper Clips is an incredible multiplayer game. Number 5, I'll put at Super Mario 3D World. Maybe the most underrated 3D Mario game. And playing through that multiplayer, especially now that on Switch, where there is online multiplayer, chef's kiss, so much fun. Definitely, if you haven't played that game co-op, I highly recommend it. All right, the Nintendo 101 has a few more actually. Your most anticipated game on the calendar. I've mentioned this game before in this Q&A. Wolverine, Marvel's Wolverine by Insomniac Games. The Spider-Man games, all 3 of them, both Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Spider-Man 2. Those are phenomenal. And the 2 superheroes that I grew up reading the most were Wolverine and Spider-Man in terms of like comic books when I was a kid. So to have both of those characters getting the video game adaptations that they deserve makes me so happy. And the fact that Insomniac has proven itself time and time again with the Spider-Man games puts so much confidence for me in Wolverine. Also, Marvel fan. So Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, Arc System Works doing a 2D tag fighter with Marvel characters. That's super exciting. Nintendo specific, I'll probably say Splatoon Raiders. I think that looks unbelievable. I think that there's so many cool things at play with that. I'm excited to see what they do with a more single player focused Splatoon, because as we talked about last week when we were covering the new Splatoon Raiders trailer, they've done an amazing job with every single player piece of content that they've put out. And I'm so excited to see one that's like the entirety of their creativity is funneling into the single player focused part of it. And I think there's a lot of cool stuff they could do with that. If the Zelda Ocarina of Time remake is real, I think that skyrockets up there. It probably even rivals Wolverine. Zelda Ocarina of Time is my second favorite game of all time. So if they can bring that to the modern age, I might have a hard conversation to have with myself about whether I like that more or Breath of the Wild. It's really going to be tough if they if they do a great job with it and introduce ways that make it a little bit easier to play in 2026 than it was in 1998. I recently wrote a preview and I talked about this on GameInformer.com and All Things Gamers, but The Blood of Dawnwalker. It is the new game from the director of The Witcher 3. He has a new studio called Rebel Wolves. That game, I emerged from that preview session that I went to out in Poland completely blown away. Go to GameInformer.com and check out my write-up for that. Or listen to this recent All Things Gamers that I put out on the Patreon, because the level of choice that they are implementing into this game is absurd. Like, it's unlike anything I've seen in a long, long time. They keep saying, like, pen and paper level of choice. And I think that is what they seemingly have accomplished. Now, I've only seen the early hour of it. But yeah, it looks like they are doing some incredibly ambitious stuff with really fun, like, vampire stories tied into it and everything. So those are the things I'm most looking forward to through the rest of the year. Obviously, there will be things announced. We're coming up on Summer Game Fest. There's probably going to be some huge announcements stemming from that. We will see what happens. All right. So Nintendo 101 has one more real question here. I would like to hear a couple of your hidden gems, a vastly or criminally underrated game. That's always a hard one. I mean, Snipper Clips. I mentioned that before. That was a launch title on Switch 1. It is a 2-player geometry-based puzzle game. If you have not checked that out and you have somebody who can play, I mean, it's playable single player, but if you have somebody who can play it with you, it's so much better. Snipper Clips cut it out together. Just so good. Streets of Rogue, I think, is a game that is kind of overlooked by a lot of people. There's a sequel coming out soon-ish, I guess. I mean, I don't think we've gotten an update in a while. I mentioned Super Mario 3D World, I think, is criminally underrated. That definitely fits into that category, even though it's a Mario game. I think people kind of overlook it because it came out on the Wii U, and then when it came to Switch, it was just like, oh, it's a port. But, I think that if you haven't played Super Mario 3D World, it is the soul of a 2D Mario game transposed to a 3D Mario game. So it's linear levels with a lot of, like, side exploration, and you start at a point A and a point B that you're getting to, and it is phenomenal. Some of the most cleverly designed 3D platforming I've ever played. Oh man, what else can we look at here? I'm going to bring up kind of the old eShop gems of the week. I know we haven't done eShop gems of the week in a long time. I think Ape Out is one that people have, like, kind of overlooked. The Blasphemous series is quite good. I would recommend people check that out if you like 2D side scrollers. If you like Souls-like style gameplay, but you don't really like the Souls-like gameplay, if that makes sense, like you don't like the 3D combat that they have, Blasphemous kind of feels like Dead Cells, but as a Souls-like, and not a roguelike. So that's a really good one. I like Blasphemous 2 in particular. Sorry, I don't have an immediate thing right off the top of my head for that one. That's always a really, really tough one. But yeah, those are all things I would say are pretty underrated. Lastly, pick your favorite child from this Discord chat. I love all my children equally, but no, you're not my children. You're my supporters. You're the reason that this podcast exists. Thank you so much. Nettie is back over on the Discord. Favorite Zelda dungeon? Oh man. Speaking of picking your favorite children, let me bring up a list of Zelda dungeons. Okay, I'm over on ZeldaDungeon.net. That is not what I was looking for. Zelda fandom. Or Zelda wiki on the fandom. I'm just gonna pick a few here. I really, really enjoy the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. I think that's one of the most perfectly designed temples. Similarly, I think the Deku Tree is is a fantastic tutorial dungeon in Ocarina of Time. Let me get some that are Wind Waker specific, because I know Wind Waker has some really, really great ones. Sorry, I don't have these off the top of my head. Wow, this website has so many pop-ups. Let's see. Dungeons. Okay, I really enjoy the Forsaken Fortress is fun. The Wind Temple does some really cool stuff. What is the one in Twilight Princess? I'm sorry, I'm kind of meandering all over the place here. Wow. So many ads popping up everywhere. I'm sorry here. Okay, Twilight Princess. And the City in the Sky is interesting. The Shadow Temple in Ocarina. Arbiter's Grounds, Snow Peak Ruins. That's the one I was thinking of. Okay, yeah, that is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's so many great Zelda dungeons. What else could we throw into this list? I honestly think, the Divine Beasts, having played Breath of the Wild all the way through 3 times now, I do think the Divine Beasts get a bad rap. I don't think that they're as intricately designed as a traditional dungeon, but I don't know, I have a fun time every time I play those, and I think that the shrines themselves kind of complement those dungeons. But I get it. I get the criticism that people have where it's like they don't just like, it's not a giant sprawling dungeon that ties back in. Oh, what is the one in Majora's Mask? The one that's you turn upside down. The Stone Temple, right? That's a really great one. That is a fantastically designed one. Maybe one of the better Zelda dungeons of all time. We're already coming up on the time that I said I was going to go. I'll go a little bit longer because I did rant a little bit in the beginning. Let me get a quick drink of water. Yeah, it turns out when you talk for an hour straight with no interruptions, your mouth gets dry. Pratable over on Discord. Top 3 non-Nintendo Zelda-like games of all time. Okay, we'll go with Elden Ring. I think that, kind of that cyclical inspiration I was talking about before. I think that, he didn't admit it to me when I interviewed Hidetaka Miyazaki, but I think that Elden Ring doesn't exist without Breath of the Wild. I think that there was some inspiration there in terms of the world design. But that said, I also think that, without Z targeting popularized by Ocarina of Time, we don't have Elden Ring. So I don't think that's unfair, even though there are a lot of differences in the way that Souls-like games play. I think they are heavily inspired by the original 3D Zelda games, then eventually Breath of the Wild. Let's go with Hyper Light Drifter. That is a fantastic kind of retro top-down style Zelda game. It's very short. If you are looking for something quick to play, Hyper Light Drifter is a terrific game that you should definitely check out. I think it's usually pretty cheap on Switch as well. Let's go with Blossom Tales, The Sleeping King. If you like A Link to the Past, this is just basically an indie studio. I think it's called Pixel Castle. They did basically their love letter to A Link to the Past, and it's very cleverly designed. I think I gave it like an 8.5 when I reviewed it back when it first came out. God, was that like 2018 maybe is when that first came out. They did put out a sequel called The Minotaur Prince, which I didn't think was quite as good, but the first Blossom Tales game is really, really great, and I recommend it. You said top 3. I'll give you a couple more. Let's do Immortals Phoenix Rising. I think that is, speaking of underrated games, I think that is an overhated game. It's very, very, it's basically like, what if the Assassin's Creed Odyssey team made a cartoonishly funny game that like took inspiration from both Greek mythology and Breath of the Wild. I think that is probably the best way to describe that. And I had a great time with that game. I think I both wrote the cover story for Game Informer and reviewed it, and I came away enjoying that game quite a bit. I don't know how well it runs on Switch, but I played it on PlayStation 5 because that's just the review code they had at the time. But yeah, Immortals Phoenix Rising. And then Let's go The Swords of Ditto, Mormo's Curse. That is basically, it's kind of like the Zelda roguelike that I pitched, but in a completely different way. You are born as a hero and you go on a quest to defeat, it's like top-down style, and you go on a quest to defeat this sorcerer who is taking over the world. And every time you win, the world gets a little nicer, and every time you lose, it gets a little bit darker. So your goal is to beat him enough times that he disappears forever. And it's a lot of fun. There are definitely some hitches in the formula and some problems that I have, and the repetition does get to you eventually. But that's a fun, like, lesser known call out, I think. I mean, there's some obvious ones that I could throw in there, but let's just stick with that. Rob over on Discord, final one from the Patreon people, and then I'll do a kind of a speed run of some of the non-Patreon questions that I got here. This one came via email. Hi, Brian. I love the podcast and listen to it every week. Thank you so much. Do you think we'll ever see the Nintendo Music phone app made as a CarPlay app? It's currently not available as one, and I would like to be able to pull it up on my car's infotainment screen and access Nintendo's music for playback in my car. Keep up the good work, Jason L. from Reisterstown, Maryland. Thank you. Reisterstown, Maryland. I have worked there. So, way back in another life, I was working in Reisterstown. I grew up in Maryland. So, first of all, Jason, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for emailing. Nintendo's always kind of behind the curve, right? Like, for the longest time, they were not putting their music anywhere. They would put like an occasional thing up on YouTube or streaming or whatever, but then they put this Nintendo Music app, which feels like a little bit behind the times, trying to get a proprietary music app. I think eventually they might, but I don't think it's a priority. That's where I would kind of go with that. They're always a little bit behind. They took forever to really embrace online play in a full-throated way. They just added like native voice chat in their games. That's why, if podcast friend of the show, Nintendo Voice Chat, is called that, because there was no Nintendo Voice Chat in the lead up to the Switch 2. You had to go into the phone app, if you recall. So Nintendo's always going to lag a little bit behind in terms of like embracing different kinds of technologies. So, the short answer is, I think eventually they might, but I don't think it's going to be a priority for them, nor do I think it's going to be particularly soon. Now, I'd love to be proven wrong. I think that it's having whatever way you want to listen to your music be able to be done, I think is the way to go. Like, I love collecting vinyl, and I think that it gives you superior sound quality. I have most of my favorite albums. Some of them are very difficult to find, and I'm not going to drop $300 on one vinyl record. But I have most of my favorite albums on vinyl. So when I go to throw them on, I can listen to it that way. It's one of my favorite things to do on just like a chill Sunday afternoon, is just put on a record, pour myself a drink, or just, sit back and just vibe out to a record. One of my favorite records. I also fully embrace, like, I have an Apple Music subscription, and I listen to my music. I would say 95% of the time that I'm listening to music is on Apple Music. Now, I don't know if there's a better way to go about. I know you say you want it up on your infotainment screen. I don't know if there is a great way to do that. I know on my Accord that I have a Honda Accord. It was right before they added CarPlay. It was I can select iPod when I plug my phone in, and it will play whatever I have, whether it's YouTube, whether it is a podcast app, anything that I put in there. If I select iPod as the source, it will do that. And it's not CarPlay, but I don't know if you have that setting if you are doing that. I know you want it displayed on your screen. I don't know if it would do that, because I know for Spotify it does not display it up on the screen, but for Apple Music it does. So your mileage may vary there. But thank you so much for the email. I realized that I skipped over Rob. I introduced Rob's question on Discord, and then I did not read it. I jumped right to Jason's email. Rob on Discord said, "Have you watched the Nintendo cartoons by Terminal Montage and Cas Van de Pol?" I did not until I got this email, or this message from you on the Discord. I watched the Ocarina of Time one from Terminal Montage and the Donkey Kong Country one from Cas Van de Pol. They're fun. I would say in general, not my brand of humor of choice. But I had a lot of fun watching them. I think that there's some really cute references. Like there was a fun Smash Brothers one and the Ocarina of Time one, and the Donkey Kong Country one had some really fun moments referencing the different events that happened throughout there. I'm a big fan of kind of like recreations of stories of games from back in the day. There is oh man, what is the creator that I want to shout out here? It's one of my favorite videos to just put on in the background. Sonic 3 Retold. It's a creator called James_179. I want to shout them out. They do sprite animations. So they take the original sprites, add new types of animations that you can do in there, and retell the story. They did one of Sonic 3 from start to finish. It's 51 minutes, 31 seconds long, and it goes throughout the entire saga all the way through to the end of Sonic and Knuckles. So it's not just Sonic 3, it's Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but it's called Sonic 3 Retold. That is so much fun to just sit down and watch that. And it adds context, and it's a little fan fiction-y at times, but it sticks pretty hard to the established story. I really enjoy this guy's work. I'm going to his YouTube channel right now. He has several ones. It looks like he's working on some Sonic Mania stuff at the time. Yeah, he has all these different animations, but he has playlists for the ones that he's done. He's done Sonic 1 Retold, Sonic CD Retold, and Sonic 3 Retold, and they're great. I think he said he's working on Sonic 2 Retold. But I don't know what this. Oh, there's Sonic 2 animations that he's doing. Unfortunately, it looks like it's been quite a while since he has done a Sonic 2 one, but it's fun to just sit and watch these. He does a great job, and I know that I'm derailing from your conversation, but yeah, I enjoyed the videos that I looked up when you asked me this question, Rob. But yeah, I think that, that type of stuff really does appeal to me. The humor, however, is kind of hit or miss for me, despite how much I enjoyed those videos. But thanks for the recommendations. Let's speed run these last few here. I mean, I got several from Blue Sky here. Charles Hart, my coworker over at Game Informer. Which lesser-known Zelda item do you hope to see Link use in the live-action movie? And then lesser-known would exclude things like bombs or the bow and arrow that appear in most games. I like that thing that Link has that he can grind on in Twilight Princess. What is it called? It's such an underused, thing. The spinner. So he gets on this thing. It's only used in the Arbiter's Ground, and it's such a cool set piece item that you use, but it's really only used in that section. That is extremely niche. It would be cool to unlock some sort of, stasis or magnesis ability, like the runes from either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. I think that might be a little bit down the line, though. I like the fire wand from like A Link to the Past. But yeah, bombs and bow and arrows are basically guaranteed, I would think. So yeah, that's what I would say. Those are my answers. Imran, former Game Informer editor. I think he's over at Restart now, doing cool stuff. Question. Hey, why is Mario such an a-hole, censor that, in the movies, and whose decision do you think it is? I think that's probably Illumination. It's played for laughs. Mario is, they had to give him some sort of personality, right? Like, he's very much, he's quirky in the games, but I wouldn't exactly say he has much in way of, like, actual personality traits, aside from he's a upbeat character who seems determined a lot, and he wants to save Peach and his friends. You get some expressive moments, but they had to add something to appeal to a wider audience than just that, and giving him some nuance in that, and playing into kind of the New York side of it, because he is a character from Brooklyn, so I get it. Zach Kotzer on Blue Sky. Should they allow doping in the Mario and Sonic Olympics? Yes, they should. Let's get Wario and Eggman, super roided up, and let's have them throw a javelin out of the stadium. Let's do that. Michael Murphy, who has also done some freelance work for Game Informer. If the Legend of Zelda film is based off of a game, which game would you want it to be, and which one would you not want it to be, if any? I mean, my immediate answer is Ocarina of Time. I think that is the baseline for storytelling in the Zelda franchise, and it would be a great way to onboard a lot of people. I don't know how they do that unless they have like a younger kid who plays the beginning part of that story. I think they could do... it looks like they're kind of doing a hybrid between Ocarina of Time and maybe Breath of the Wild, but I just don't know, unless they have two actors playing Link and two actors playing Zelda, I don't know how they're going to pull that off. But yeah, I think Ocarina of Time makes the most sense. Alternatively, I would like to see Skyward Sword, since this is an origin story. I think we could see kind of, honestly, if I had to guess, it's going to be a combination of Skyward Sword, where it's like the creation of the essence of Ganon. It's also going to be the creation of the Master Sword, which will be the thing that deals with him ultimately. Ocarina of Time, where, I think there's probably going to be a Ganondorf something or other happening, and Breath of the Wild in terms of like setting and I don't know. I don't know what they could pull from Breath of the Wild, since admittedly Breath of the Wild story is pretty limited. And I don't think they're going to do Link fought and was put into a coma for 100 years. And now he's back and he's got to save Hyrule from this apocalypse. I think that's something they do down the line, if they're going to do that at all. So I think Ocarina of Time is going to be the game that they borrow the most from. In terms of what I would not want to see, I don't want to see I think Tears of the Kingdom, it would be too fast to jump into. Wind Waker, it would also be too fast to jump into that. I don't want to see Hyrule flooded, and then I think that's something down the line. They could do a Wind Waker style game. I think Minish Cap, that's a little bit too weird to jump right into. I think they need to establish a little bit before they do anything like that. So yeah, I think that we need to start with more of the baseline things that people associate with Zelda, whether that be Twilight Princess. I think Twilight Princess would be a nice sequel if they start with kind of a combination of Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time from a narrative perspective. I think Twilight Princess would be an incredible sequel. There's a lot of sequel elements there, like the Ganondorf being carried over and being imprisoned in the Twilight Realm, and also the hero of time kind of coming back in the if you know kind of way in that game. So yeah, that's my pick there. Just a few more here and then we'll get out of here. Tomas Francese on Blue Sky. I know Tomas. What am I doing here? What's a game franchise you heavily associated with Nintendo, even though they've never published a game in that franchise? Oh man, that's tough. It's probably something on N64, or maybe SNES actually. For a long time, I associated Street Fighter with Nintendo just because I played Street Fighter 2 so much on my SNES. That was how I fell in love with fighting games, was playing Street Fighter 2 Turbo on SNES. What games? Let me look up. I'm going to bring up a list here. I think Mega Man is kind of one of those that's pretty well linked. I mean, I know that's another Capcom game. One of my first games I ever played was a Contra game. So Contra has always been kind of closely linked, even though that's Konami. I mean, most of the Nintendo games that I associate with them at this point are very much linked. Or they're published by Nintendo. I would say something like Donkey Kong Country, obviously published by Nintendo, but not developed by Nintendo. In fact, Donkey Kong Bonanza was the first Nintendo developed Donkey Kong game since, the very, very early days. So that's that's an interesting one, even though it's definitely published by Nintendo. But yeah, I don't really have a great answer for you on this one. I'm sorry. Justin on Blue Sky, do you think that the Wave Race series will ever return, or has that ship sailed? Pun intended. I would not be surprised if we got another Wave Race game. You know, it's like Nintendo just has to figure out the right way to do it. The Switch era has proven one thing, and that is now that we have extremely popular Nintendo consoles, once again, they are kind of bringing back these franchises that have been a little bit dormant ever since they kind of had like a failed entry. So Wave Race, I think the last Wave Race game was on GameCube. So I would not be surprised if Nintendo's like, yeah, let's dig in deeper into our catalog. We just got Tomodachi Life. We're getting a Rhythm Heaven game, which I never thought we'd get another one of those. We got Nintendo Switch Sports, which I didn't think we were going to get another Wii Sports game. We got Super Mario Strikers, which felt dead in the water for the longest time. It's Wave Race isn't the number one dormant franchise I'd like to see come back. There are definitely things like F-Zero, Star Fox, what else? Kid Icarus, F-Zero. Yeah, F-Zero already said. Man, there are so many dormant Nintendo franchises. I should do a whole episode on that. But yeah, Wave Race is definitely, I remember being wowed by that game back on the N64. So I hope so. I legitimately hope so. And I do think there is a chance for that.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
And then we will end on this one. Actually, let's do two more here, and then we'll wrap up. Maximum Zelda on Blue Sky says, if it has the best sidekick, the best dungeons, some of the best music in the series, and one of the most badass-looking versions of Link, why do you think there's so much hate for Twilight Princess? I mean, I don't know if there is that much hate for Twilight Princess. I feel like there was at first, and I think that is largely faded. It's almost like the nostalgia rehabilitation. That said, I think that Twilight Princess is a fantastic game. I think that it needed less work to make it great than the Wind Waker did, even though I think Wind Waker is a better game, especially the HD version of Wind Waker. But Twilight Princess is fantastic. There is some stuff in there that I don't particularly love. I think the Twilight Realm stuff is hit or miss for me. I think there's some very clever implementations of Twilight Princess. I also think that, some of the stuff of bouncing between Wolf Link and regular Link kind of distracts from what I want from a Zelda game at times, but it does have incredible dungeons. I wouldn't say the best dungeons. I think that Skyward Sword has some incredible dungeons mixed in. I think Wind Waker has some unbelievable dungeons, but yeah, it's in terms of consistently great dungeons, I think that Twilight Princess is certainly up there in the conversation. It does have an incredible looking Ganondorf, incredible looking Zelda, incredible looking Link. I'm with you there. I will say that there is like a weird, I don't want to sound insulting here, but there's like a weird dullness to the visuals. I think that is played into by the way that they were trying to go darker after the backlash they got when they first showed off the Wind Waker. There's also like that weird like glow that a lot of games of that era had that sometimes doesn't age particularly well. But outside of that, I think Twilight Princess is phenomenal, and I don't think there's any reason to hate on Twilight Princess. I mean, I can understand like any game cannot be for any given person, but Twilight Princess is, if it's not a top 5 Zelda game for me, which that's a very high bar to clear, it is in the conversation of being a top 5 Zelda game. And we'll wrap up with this from Jordan Herzog on YouTube. In all of your gaming items and memorabilia that you've gotten over the years, what is your favorite item or possibly top 3? Oh, man. So the stuff that I cherish, I think is more personal, right? Like it's stuff that like I have a lot of gaming memorabilia. I've bought a lot of figures. I've bought a lot of statues. I've gotten stuff sent to me. And I cherish a lot of that stuff. I think that the stuff that like developers have done in terms of like, kind of like just like a thank you, like you can kind of see it if you're watching the video version, but I have this sketch right here, which is a sketch that it was while I was doing the interviews for the ill-fated Metaphor Refantazio cover story. that I was doing the week before Game Informer was shut down. That issue never ended up seeing the light of day. You can read the full cover story now on GameInformer.com now that we're back. But while I was doing that, Shigenori Soejima, he just came up to me before I started a longer interview, and he was like, "Hey, who's your favorite Persona character?" And I'm like, "Oh, I like a lot of Persona characters." I'm like, "Who do you like?" And he goes, "I like Makoto." And I said, "Oh, great, yeah, Makoto's awesome." And then he went over and I noticed, like, in the corner of my eye, I have very good peripheral vision, in case you can't tell from my answer about the PR people in the start of this episode. I noticed he was like sketching something. And then afterwards, he called me over and he showed me. He's like, "Oh, I drew this for you as like a thank you for coming out here." And you can see it's a sketch of Makoto, signed by Soejima. And it's like, that is such an incredible honor that he would want to do that. So that is something that I hold very near and dear to my heart. Persona 5 is a top 5 video game of all time for me. Just to have the character designer and the character artist sketch me a picture of his favorite character from that game is a huge honor. I also have a few games that I've gotten signed over the years as I've met with some of these developers. I have Elden Ring signed by Hidetaka Miyazaki. I have Sonic Adventure signed by both Takashi Iizuka and the singer of Crush 40, Johnny Gioeli. But I think my favorite, my most cherished one is I got a copy of Breath of the Wild signed by Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi. And that is something that, that's one I'll cherish for the rest of my life. That's my favorite game of all time, signed by the director and the producer. That was something that I really, really, really cherish. What else? I mean, I'll move my head out of the way for the people on the video here, but you can see right here, I have an article that Retro Gamer, shout out to Retro Gamer magazine, they wrote about me. And I've always been someone who has written a lot of stuff for magazines, but the articles have never been about me. So the fact that somebody would want to highlight me in a magazine, I know how precious space is in a magazine. I know how difficult it is to justify putting anything in a magazine. And the fact they devoted 6 pages to my career in that issue, it's the issue with the Xbox 360 on the cover, if you're interested. That meant so much to me. And I that's the only time I've ever gone and gotten something custom framed, because that was such a huge honor that they would want to do that for me, about me. I mean, it wasn't like I called in a favor or anything. They reached out to me, and then I all I did was sit down for an interview with them. They did all the work. But outside of that, I have things that I've gotten along the way. Like I have my picture with Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo when I interviewed them together. That was a huge honor for me. Those are people that have shaped my life in ways that I can't even begin to express. But outside of that, I have all of my cover stories that I've written framed. Like you can't see them, but it's like all the way, it wraps all the way around. And I'm going to have some more to add up there in the coming months. So I love collecting those and framing those and putting them up on my wall. So those I think are probably my favorites. I also have, you can see on the video version maybe here, issue 1 of Game Informer that I put in a protective sleeve. That is something that I think is really, really cool, even though that predates my time with Game Informer by, about a decade and a half, or two and a half decades. I'm sorry. But yeah, it's something that I all those things I will cherish a lot. Gaming has given me this life that I have. Gaming is something that has shaped my life in so many ways, maybe more ways than anything, or maybe in more ways than any other thing on this planet. And it's something that I continue to, enjoy doing, even though I'm, 39 years old. I've been gaming for something like 36 years, I would say at this point. Getting my start on the NES and then moving over to the SNES with my first console that I actually owned. And it's been it's an incredible thing to be able to work in this space that this hobby that I grew up loving, and now be able to have these things that represent that love in a physical way really means a lot. So yeah, I think that's all the time we have for now. Thank you so much to everyone who wrote in. If you sent in anything and I didn't get to it, I apologize. I think we got to most of the questions that came in. If you sent one in after I recorded this episode, I know the posts on social media are still live. Posts on the Discord still live. Posts on the Patreon is still live. I will add it to the bank of inbox questions that I have, and hopefully in the future I will get to that. That was that last one actually was all of your gaming items and memorabilia. That was an old one from YouTube that I didn't get to last time, and I wanted to throw it in there here. So thank you again to everyone who wrote in. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. As you know, the Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. You can also reach out to me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. But for now, that is our show for this week. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to the All Things Nintendo podcast. Before we get out of here, I just want to give a very special thank you to the $10 patrons of this podcast. Alex Stadnick, Ben Richland, Big Mitch, Chad Brecky, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jawar Hello, Johnny Five, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, KC Radio Man, Kenny Shaw, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Nathaniel Edison, Ozman83, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichert, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Zane Sink, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you so much to everyone who continues to support this podcast, both on Patreon and just by listening, commenting, sharing the show with those you care about. Every little bit helps, but especially if you are a $10 patron of the show, you are the reason this show is able to keep going week after week.
This show is part of Poderation, the nerdy podcast network. From D&D and video games through to ancient history and books of all genres, we are a group of podcasts all about things you can nerd the heck out about. We are currently looking for new podcasts to join the network. So if you know someone who wants to take their nerdy podcast to the next level, send them to poderation.com to get in touch.